I want to say a word about FEE before we get into our subject tonight. FEE is headquartered, at least for a few more months, where we have been since our founding in 1946, Irvington, New York. But before the year is out, we'll be moving everything and everybody to Atlanta. Cool. And in anticipation of that, 2 years ago, this very weekend, I bought a home in Noonan, and we opened a branch office not far from here, but we're in the process of looking for a site right now, either in Midtown or Buckhead, ideally in Buckhead, but at Midtown prices, we can swing it, and that's where we'll be for our new permanent headquarters. And we're delighted to be in Georgia, where the climate is better in every respect, both weather-wise and politically speaking, compared to New York. And if you visit our website, fee.org, you'll see a wealth of information about free markets, commentary, articles, videos, podcasts. I encourage you to give it a look, and also to consider our summer seminars. We have now 4 of them this summer, each one, 4 in Atlanta. We have 7 altogether, 2 are for high school, and 5 are at the college level. 1 of those are in New York, but the other 4 are here in Atlanta. All during the month of June. Each one is a week long. Anybody here perhaps already reserved to attend one of those? Oh, great, yeah, wonderful. Okay, we still have time, still have a couple of weeks before the deadline. They are held in the Georgia Pacific Auditorium, and we put you up at the Hyatt, and there's no charge for them. If you qualify and are accepted, we provide meals, lodging, all the speakers over the 5 days of seminars. And it's very competitive entry, but there are still openings, so I encourage you to give it a look, and hopefully we'll see some of you this summer. My topic tonight is great myths of the Great Depression, and I should tell you that everything I'll say this evening, and then some, is in this little essay that we've provided outside at the table. So please, I don't want to have to go home with any of them, so take more than one. We have plenty more where they came from, and I encourage you to do so. Because I have a friend here tonight, I've forgotten that he told me some time ago he might be coming all the way from Pennsylvania. Scott Bixler, my former roommate at Grove City College, here for the Masters, I guess. Not to play in it, but to watch the Masters. He and I had Dr. Hans Senholz at Grove City College. And so I'm reminded of a story that Dr. Senholz used to tell us. It would be, I think, a good opening for this talk. He used to say, if you want to give a good speech, you should find a way to include 4 particular elements in your talk. And if you've got all 4 of these in your presentation, it doesn't matter what the overall subject is, it'll be a winner of a talk. And those 4 elements are mention of God, royalty, sex, and suspense. And if you can roll all 4 of those into one talk, he said, you've got a winner. And there was a little story that went with it. He said there was a grade school teacher who tried this once on her class of 5th or 6th graders. And she had them write a short story. And she told them, make sure you have somehow worked into your short stories mention of God, royalty, sex, and suspense. So they started writing, and after about a minute, one of the students raises his hand and says, I'm done. And she said, how could you be done? How could you write a story in a minute and have all 4 of those elements? Back to work. He insisted, I'm done. So he brought up his paper, and she looked at it. Sure enough, he had all 4. It read, my God, said the princess, pregnant again. Who done it? I don't think I have all 4 elements in this talk, but I'll enjoy it. Anyway. I think when it comes to the Great Depression, it's important to view this episode, this very painful episode in American history, not as one 12-year amorphous lump of time and events, but rather to think of it in its distinct phases. The Great Depression, I think, is best understood as 4 depressions rolled into one, or 4 phases of a Great Depression. And then the question, of course, is, well, aside from what were those phases, how long was this total experience? Some people, most people probably would say, well, we know it began in 1929, it was over in 1941 with the coming of the Second World War. That makes it a 12-year experience. I think it's arguable, in fact I argued this, that it really wasn't just a 12-year experience, it was a 16-year depression. That we didn't see real recovery until after World War II. More on that a little later. But whether you look at it as a 12-year or a 16-year experience, some questions should leap to mind immediately. One of them being, why did this one last as long as it did? If it was 12 years, that's more than 3 times longer than any previous depression in American history. If it's 16 years, well, that's 4 times longer than any previous depression. We'd had a number of them before in our history. And they were all over with in a matter of a year or 2 or 3, or in the case of the longest prior one before 1929, about 3.5 years, the one that started in 1893. To this day, that's the second deepest and longest in American history, depression. Well, what made this one so deep and so long-lasting, the one that started in 1929? The first phase of the Great Depression we call the monetary or financial phase. This is the phase that explains why it started in the first place, where it came from. The subsequent phases will explain what took a bad situation and prolonged it, and even for a time made it much worse. But the first phase tells us where it came from in the first instance. And you know, there are multiple theories about trade cycles, where they come from. Some of them have no credibility whatever. A little over 100 years ago, a leading economist of that day, about 130 years ago, W. Stanley Jevons, hypothesized that the position of the Earth vis-a-vis that of one of the other planets, either Mars or Venus, I forget, was somehow tied into trade cycles. Others thought it was sunspots. There were a lot of really wacky theories about where it came from. But I think the theory that best explains trade cycles is known as the Austrian theory. And even though it has a name that is related particularly to a prominent school of economic thought, many of its elements have been embraced or worked into other theories of the trade cycle too. In fact, there are few trade cycle theories today that don't at least argue that money and credit have something to do with the cycles. With the Austrian theory, what happens to money and credit is really central to where these cycles come from. The Austrian theory holds that markets fall into depression not because of some inherent shortcoming or flaw on their part, but rather because of mischief by monetary authorities, by those in charge of money and credit. And it begins first in a boom that is fostered by what we often call easy money, low interest rates, flooding the system with money and credit, driving interest rates down, stimulating a boom which is not sustainable, a boom that is artificial. It's based upon sending false signals, low interest rates that are artificial and short-term, unsustainable, caused not by people saving more money, in which case those interest rates would have some tie to reality, but rather tied instead to what monetary authorities are doing, often because of political consideration, expanding the nation's money and credit supply. At some point, that either stops or slows down, the effect of it wears off, and in fact, a situation can get out of hand in the other direction if a monetary expansion phase is followed by a contraction phase, which makes the downturn in the economy, the bust, when the bubble bursts, perhaps even deeper than it might otherwise be. That's a trade cycle theory in a nutshell. You could spend a whole semester talking just about that, but I ask you simply to be aware that that's the cycle I'm drawing from in an effort to explain the Great Depression. But it isn't necessarily the only cycle theory. I think it's the one that has the greatest credibility and that explains more than any other theory. It does it in a way that is integrated with the rest of economics. Some theories, they'll acknowledge the role of the entrepreneur, perhaps properly, but then they explain depressions as if, well, that's just a strange moment when entrepreneurs have gone crazy and they all make bad decisions